What's up, dudes? Yonkers here with the College Football Breakdown Show. I am going to break down DFS picks for November 20th, 2020, Week 12. This video will only be for the Friday slate. There's a 4-game slate. As far as content goes this week, I'm in the process of getting that article turned out, so I'm not sure whether there will be a thread on Twitter or an article or both. Depends on how long it is and how much the editors hate me if it's too long. So looking into it, but that will be on its way shortly, probably after I finish this video. And then I will also have a preview of the Saturday slate. It's a fantastic college football Saturday. Some great games. So I'll be breaking that down as well. But more on that to come. For now, let's get straight to it. The first game on the slate, we have a barn burner between 1-7 Syracuse versus 2-6 Louisville. Both programs really struggling. Dino Babers probably on the hot seat. Probably should be if it was a normal year. Definitely would be. They are averaging only 13.5 points per game over their last two. And they weren't against very great defenses either. They're 123rd in the country in total offense on the year. So not very pretty. Their quarterback, Tommy DeVito, has been out with their original starter. And while he wasn't great, their offense appears to have gotten worse since that has happened. The Louisville defense is not good. They actually allow 6 yards per play and 30 points per game. I mean, allowing 6 yards per play is really pretty bad. They allow 196 rush yards per game, so mostly we would look towards the Syracuse run offense usually, but Syracuse does not have a very good rushing offense. They did play better in their last game against Boston College. It was a 16-13 loss, so that was better for Syracuse's defense. And they are a bad team off a bye, which usually would mean that might be a bye time for them. So it's really, really tough to call here. As far as looking at the Syracuse, and I'll say that on the slate quite a few times, this is a very difficult slate to call. And I guess I'll preface this before. I don't play 150 lineups. If you do, I hope this information helps you. This is mainly an information pod to get that out to you. I know there are a lot of DFS players, and there's not a lot of college football content, especially not free content. So try to help you out. Liking this video always helps. Subscribing always helps. Anyway, Syracuse, we don't know who their quarterback's going to be. I would think it's going to be Jacobian Morgan instead of Rex Culpepper. I would not be surprised if they both see action. Morgan's not. He's very cheap in playing a bad defense. Usually I'd have ownership. I may or may not throw them in a lineup or two. I don't think they're something you want to target because the offense has been so bad. But I think it's going to be Morgan. I would lean towards Morgan. I would keep an eye on Culpepper. I think they might split reps. So take that for what you will. As far as the running back, Sean Tucker is the main guy. He's had a few decent games against this bad Louisville rush defense, allowing about 200 yards per game. By all means, he could be in play here. I wouldn't look any further below him. As far as at wide receiver, it's pretty straightforward. Taj Harris is a target hog. He's definitely their go-to guy. They target him short. They target him deep. Pretty good player. He's dropped a lot of passes. I haven't watched this Syracuse team in a few weeks because they've been so horrendous. Who would subject themselves to that eye poison? Not I. I watch a lot of college football, but even some of this, I don't know. I'll be watching this one because at least for half an hour because it's the first game to start on a Friday. What is wrong with me? What is wrong with us? I don't know. Anyway, Taj Harris is the go-to guy, 5,100. That's a very good price in playing Louisville. I don't hate that at all. I will probably play some Taj Harris. He's had some big games. He hasn't really had huge games lately, and I don't think he's had a very good game with the new quarterback. So that's something to monitor. As far as the other wide receivers, the only guy I would have a ton of interest in. So there is Nykeem Johnson, their slot guy. Usually this offense really targets the slot guy. Usually that's a position of strength. But just with this weird offensive year, there hasn't been much going on. You'll see he does carry the ball every now and then. He's been pretty effective. But his workload hasn't been great, which is what we would typically look for in a Syracuse slot guy. I still think at 4,100 he is too cheap, so he's decent. As far as the Louisville side of things, the big news is Javian Hawkins, their star running back, has opted out. I guess that's a thing nowadays. Players are opting out in the middle of the season, so he's not going to be playing. And Tutu Atwell, their star wide receiver, is questionable. He did not play last game. Many speculated him and Hawkins were both sitting out to both enter the draft at the same time. It's been very hush-hush as far as what's going on. As far as I can tell, I believe it is injury-related, and he's not sitting out. But I still don't know if he's going to play. Right now, I'm assuming he doesn't, but it's college football. A note on college football, the injury reports just aren't there. Even in a normal year, sometimes you play guys and you don't find out they're inactive until game kicks off. That's very common in college football. It's just a part of it, especially with DFS. That's just something you have to live with. And it's been even worse this year with COVID for a number of reasons, especially I think one that I haven't heard enough people talking about is that a lot of these reporters who would usually get this information to us, a lot of these reporters aren't granted the same access that they typically would be. So long story short, we don't know. All right, as far as going against this Syracuse defense, this is a bad Syracuse defense. Bad pass D, even worse run D. They're number 110 in the country against the rush, 223 rush yards per game allowed at a 4.8 yards per carry clip. Mikael Cunningham, with Javian Hawkins out, might be their leading rusher going forward. That showed last game when he ran for a ridiculous 197 yards on 20 rushes and 2 touchdowns. I was surprised earlier in the year that he wasn't running more. He's a very good runner, but we can see he's been taking off, and we can see he's been very effective. Like, all it took was for those attempts to go up. And against this bad Syracuse team, I think Malik Cunningham is a fantastic play. The price is a little prohibitive, of course. As far as the running backs, Hassan Hall, I would think he would be the top guy. He was their main backup when Hawkins was healthy, and then I guess he missed the last game, but it was for a personal reason, so I don't think he's banged up. It was a family matter. And the fact that he's probable, I think he's going to lead this team in carries, and I think Berkeley will see some as well. They like to ride the they like to ride a workhorse. Hawkins has just absolutely taken over the workhorse role, and he did that in his first game as a freshman last year, to give you an idea of how they like to run things. So I think Hall is the most talented. I think he'll seize that role. However, there is a chance Berkeley sees a fair amount of carries. There is a chance they split carries as well. But I like Hall at 5,000. As far as the wide receivers, again, if Tutu Atwell plays, he's way too cheap at 6,700. I love him. If he doesn't play, Des Fitzpatrick is a fantastic play. I think even if Atwell plays, Fitzpatrick is definitely in play at 4,800. He's been too cheap. I've been playing him here and there the last couple of weeks. He had one very big game. I love Mason Fitzpatrick. And as far as the secondary guys, I mean, this guy Braden Smith, he only has 15 catches all year. He's a deep threat, so there's definitely a chance he could break one against Syracuse, but it's more of a dart throw, I would say. And then Marshawn Ford is a very touchdown-dependent tight end. You see he averaged 9.8 fantasy points per game. I do think he's a good player. He just doesn't see very many catches, so he's very touchdown-dependent. Could he get one here? It's against Syracuse. Sure, he could. All right, moving on. Purdue versus Minnesota. Purdue has... Let me see here. Let me get my notes straight. Let's start with the Purdue's offense. So Minnesota, this team has been all over the place. Has not been a good year for PJ Fleck and company, to say the least. The bottom's kind of fallen out very quickly after a fantastic year last year. Minnesota has the number 114 rush defense in the country, 237 rush yards per game allowed. On the flip side, so normally we'd look at that and say we're all over Purdue's running game. However, Purdue only ran, I believe it was for only 2, count them, 1-2 total rushing yards against Northwestern last week. Now, Northwestern is way, way, way better of a defense than Minnesota, but it's still worth noting Purdue's rush offense is not great. This Braum offense in general, I usually am all over them in fantasy, all over them. They play at a pretty good pace, and they're just way under the radar. This year, I'm not so sure. I'm starting to wane on them a little bit, which is weird because they're having a pretty good year, and their quarterback's averaging over 300 pass yards per game. So I will say it is a good matchup. In general, I'm not sure how I feel about them. So Horvath at 8,200, I do think he's way too expensive. This guy's a former walk-on. I do not think he's the most talented back I've ever seen, but he is by far the clear workhorse, and he has already produced game after game. Even though he couldn't run the ball last game, he did have 100 yards receiving. So he's been fumbling the ball, 3 fumbles in his last 2 games. Interesting. Again, I don't think he's fantastic, but against Minnesota, you do not need to be fantastic. So it's a tough price to pay for a back of Horvath's ilk, but definitely within consideration. As far as at the quarterback position, so this Minnesota defense, forgot to mention the keyest stat of all. They're dead last in the country. They allow 7.8 yards per play. That's awful, almost a first down. As far as the weather in this game, it's going to be a little bit cold, somewhere between 30 and 45 degrees. I know that's a big range, but that's what I got when I checked. So anyway, I would think these teams maybe keep it on the ground just a little bit more than usual. I would really have ownership interest in their quarterback, Aiden O'Connell, if I knew he was going to play at 6,600. Like I said, he's been averaging over 300 yards per game, but he's questionable, and nobody really seems to have information on this, which, again, kind of suspect. Their backup, Plummer, at 6,200. I think either one of these guys are playable. Just keep in mind you're going to have to be checking the news right up until kickoff. So Plummer he played last year, and I thought he was absolutely fine. He filled in. They had a lot of quarterback injuries last year, and he played, and he was fine. His stats were pretty similar to O'Connell's, if I remember correctly. So I don't think there's much of a drop-off at all. So both of them are fine. And they're cheap. You have two really expensive quarterbacks in the FAU's quarterback, Posey, and in Cunningham. And then if you're looking to pay down, I think that's where you would probably want to look, would be at Purdue. All right. As far as the receiving options, definitely the name you want to mention. So Rondale Moore is a stud, first-round draft pick in the NFL, but it seems like he's probably not going to play football this year. Not sure why he opted back in. Now he's not playing. Nobody really seems to know. But as far as I can tell, I would assume he's not playing. But again, be checking that, because if he does at 5,600, he is an auto start lock. David Bell at 8,500, the clear top wide receiver on the slate. He's seen double-digit targets in all three of his games. You can see right there he's averaging 31 DraftKings points. He's super, super talented. He came on as a freshman last year and really got his, and he really goes off when Moore's not in the game, and we can assume Moore's probably not in the game. Now, does that change if Moore plays? Yeah, I think it drops Bell down a significant amount, and I think Moore at 5,600 is a play. I'm not sure I'm playing Bell at that price if Moore does play. Their secondary receiver, Milton Wright, is that his first name? Yep, Milton Wright. At 4,900, you can see there he averages 17.4 DraftKings points. He is too cheap, so he's pretty good. Especially if you can't fit Bell, I think you should definitely fit Wright. Maybe that gives you some leverage. I wouldn't really look much deeper than that. I don't really think I have to, at least personally. When I was doing some lineup constructing, I didn't really have to look much farther than that. And really, none of their other guys stuck out to me. They really force feed Bell. That's how their offense works. They just force feed Bell. Speaking of force feeding, Mohamed Ibrahim. Let's switch over to Minnesota. Force feeding. Mohamed Ibrahim is their entire offense. He has 715 yards and 10 touchdowns, which is ridiculous. Through, 4 games? Through 4 games. You can see his stats. I mean, it's ridiculous. He did have a step back last week when they played Iowa, which we could kind of see coming, right? Iowa's the best defense that they faced, but he still went for 144 yards. Their offense has got nothing going. It's been very strange. The defensive struggles, I guess we could foresee with Minnesota. I know they've had COVID troubles, so maybe they get better as the year goes on. But Tanner Morgan, their quarterback, was supposed to be a stud, or at least a lot of people thought. Some in the scouting community I trust told me he wasn't really that good, and I guess they were right. But it's been weird for the bottom to fall out this much, seeing as they return so much talent. Anyway, maybe they get it going in the passing game. As of right now, all we know is that they have a bad passing game, and they just force feed their running back, Mohamed Ibrahim. 9,700, obviously super cost prohibitive, but he's the clear top running back on the slate if you can get to him. Nobody behind him gets a ton of work. All right. So this Purdue defense, normally we would attack them through the pass catchers. They're number 89 in the country. Pass defense, 257 yards per game allowed. But like I said, this pass offense hasn't gotten going. So Tanner Morgan has had a lot of huge games under his belt last year at 5,800. That's a very cheap price. I don't want to completely cross him out, but I would say he's been really bad in each game so far this year. What's going to be different this year? I mean, maybe it's different, but it's really just a flip of the coin. I do think as far as the receiving talent he has going against a not-so-stellar pass defense and the quote-unquote track record, even though it hasn't been this year, we know each year in college football can be very different for a team. I would say that's extremely rare to see for a quarterback at 5,800 is what I'll say. I'm not saying it's a smash hit, but it's rare. So maybe on Tanner Morgan. The volume has been terrible. Like I said, all they do is force feed Ibrahim. there's a chance he throws the ball 18 times in this game. Nobody would be that surprised. All right. As far as receivers, Rashad Bateman is a stud. You probably know who he is by now. An absolute stud. I don't mind attacking him at 8,000. I think I'd probably prefer Bell just a little bit to Bateman, but it's very close. I just think he gets force-fed more and Purdue passes the ball. You probably a little bit more. But, so yeah, if you can get to him, he's obviously great. Ottman Bell at 4.5. This guy, I played him once and he had a 24-point game and he was fantastic, but the other 3 weeks he's been really bad. I still think he is kind of, he's probably an NFL talent and he's going against not great Purdue defense, but the production really hasn't been there. It's kind of a coin flip. I think at 4,500 the price is decent. I might bite here and there, but like I said, it's a little bit dicey. I think you could do a lot worse at 4,500, I guess is what I'll say, but super risky. Kind of dependent on a big play, most likely, since the volume's bad. Other than that, not really anything interesting going on in this offense. It's basically those top two guys and Ibrahim. However, Seth Green, this guy's always worth mentioning at 3,200. He's kind of like a Taysom Hill play. He's like a tight end, big guy they bring in the Wildcat. Every now and then he scores a touchdown, so at 3,200. Usually that's only in a showdown slate, but every now and then he waddles into a touchdown. All right, UMass versus FAU. UMass. UMass stinks, I guess is what I'll say. They were the worst team in college football except Akron. Their only win was against Akron last year, and they're not good. That's just all I say. The only guy I would consider on UMass, don't get cute. Don't play them. They're averaging 5 points per game so far this year. They're not good. And FAU has a very good defense. They're only allowing 3.4 yards per rush. The only guy, Jermaine Johnson, had 9 targets, I believe, last game. He didn't really do much, but at 3,300, I think they only have 4 games on their schedule this year, if I'm correct, UMass. So, like we could see, he did absolutely nothing, but as a punt play for a guy who got 9 targets in a game they're playing from behind, I guess he could do worse than Johnson. All right, FAU, this is where the slate's going to be, man, because UMass, you have to stack a team going against UMass, or at least have some lineups with a stack in them. But it's a difficult one to figure out because FAU's offense has not been very good. But UMass has the number 125 rush D through one game. They allowed 287 rush yards in their only game. And this guy Posey, new starter for FAU, came in last week and had a very, very, very good game against Florida International. You can see there, he's not really much of a passer. He did throw for 2 touchdowns, but it's the rushing where his upside gets there. We saw he had 6.7 yards per rush in his first game, and then 10. He had 18 carries for 182 yards and a touchdown. And that's where his value is going to be. So getting a quarterback over 10,000 where I don't know if you're solely reliant on his rushing. It's kind of like the Hendon Hooker effect where he's just way too expensive every week and you just need him to run for 3 touchdowns. And he's done that a few times. But it's like, can you really rely on that? It's tough. They're playing UMass. I think I'll have some Posey. I guess he's probably still the top quarterback option on the slate due to facing UMass, but Cunningham is close as well. So difficult choices to make in this one. Now the running back core is also very difficult. I do think Malcolm Davidson is their top running back. He has 8.1 yards per rush on only 35 carries in 5 games, which that's the question, is the workload. This guy Charles has 40 rushes in context. So doesn't even lead his team in rushes. I think he missed a game, so maybe he would lead the team in rushes if he did, but he only sees about 10 rushes per game, so I guess less than that. But lately he's been seeing about 10 rushes per game. So I don't think he should be 3,000 more than the next guy, is what I'll say. I do think he's the most talented guy. He could have a huge game against UMass, but really any of these guys could stumble into a few touchdowns. So I think Davidson's a great play, but I'm not sure exactly how much I will get to him since I think his backups are playable, and this one could be a blowout. And he might only see 9 carries. He might go 9 carries, 120 yards, 2 touchdowns, which is really good. He might go 12 carries, 90 yards, 1 touchdown. It's hard to tell. So he's fine. This guy Charles, like I mentioned, is too cheap. He's good. He's got some touchdowns. I don't think DraftKings has all of his matchups loaded up here. Maybe they do. But it's against UMass. It's really hard to call. I think Charles is fine at 4.7. Probably scores a touchdown if I had to guess. BJ Emmons, this guy had a better year last year than he's having this year. He also gets work. I mean, it wouldn't surprise me if all these guys had like 9 carries apiece. We can see there he's gotten some carries in the past, and they're playing UMass. So Emmons at 3.6 is maybe an okay punt. As far as the wide receivers, I'm not really sure I'm going to play the wide receivers, so I'm not going to give a very in-depth breakdown. They do like to spread the ball out a lot, and they probably won't pass the ball because they won't need to against UMass and with a quarterback like Posey, who's primarily a running threat. So if you want to dive into these guys, you can. I think I played Wester last week, and he caught a touchdown, but the targets aren't great. Pretty much the targets are not fantastic for anybody. I don't think anybody saw more than like 4 targets last game, so take it for what you will. All right, moving on, New Mexico versus Air Force. This is one of the tougher games to break down that I've ever had. So the info might be a little bit all over the place. Basically, both teams have had a lot of COVID issues. New Mexico isn't even in New Mexico anymore. Sounds weird. Because they have to play and practice, I believe, in Las Vegas at the old UNLV stadium, I think, because, COVID. So they have that going, and they're not a good football team. And then Air Force hasn't played in about a month because they've had a lot of games canceled. Air Force, most notably, I faded them in their first game against Navy because I said, this is always a close matchup. And Air Force had 0 returning starters on defense, something that I don't know if I've ever seen in my time covering college football, which again hasn't been that long, I suppose, but as a fan as well. And I said, there's no way you can return 0 starters. They had this thing where, I think it's called a switchback, I forget, some military term. Don't kill me if I got that wrong, where you can preserve a season of eligibility if you decide not to play, something along those lines, something eligibility related. Anyway, the starters could not opt back in, essentially. And they waxed Navy 40-7 in their first game. What the hell is happening there? Defense looked okay. They've had some okay defensive games since then. But the offense hasn't been fantastic. They were missing a ton on their offense. I believe it was in their most recent game against Boise. So it's very difficult to know who's going to get the carries because who was in, who was out. They were missing their, top 3 guys in the backfield for one of these games. So they are a complete mess. As far as New Mexico, they're also kind of a mess because we don't know if their quarterback's going to play. I think Teote would be fine if he does play. He is a dual threat. By all means, he could rush for over 50 yards in this matchup. And he could throw for some as well. But we don't know if he's going to play. Even if he does, I would probably pay up. I don't know. I might have some of him, but I think I'd probably pay up for a Cunningham or a Posey and then pay down for maybe the Purdue guy. Or maybe not even go. Or Morgan, or not even go to quarterback at all. He's kind of in the middle range. I'm not sure I'd be able to fit in guys like David Bell, and you have 2 really expensive good running backs as well. Not even mentioning Davidson. There are a lot of good expensive guys on the slate, so I'm not sure I would get there. Anyway, as far as Air Force goes, they only allow 114 rush yards per game at a 3.7 yards per carry clip. So that's pretty good. For context, New Mexico is 90th out of 126 teams in the FBS this year. In scoring offense, they only score 24.7 points per game, and Air Force is 88th, scoring only 25.3 points per game. So 2 very low-scoring teams. I'm not sure either of them have great defense. I would assume Air Force has better defense. But New Mexico does have the worst pass D in the country, which won't matter against this Air Force team. So it might actually match up well for New Mexico. They also appear, I think Rocky Long is their new defensive coordinator. Hopefully I have that right, the 3-3-5. And while their defense hasn't been great, the rush defense is actually number 3 in the country, allowing only 81 rush yards per game. Now, that might be a little skewed because they've played primary passing offenses in Hawaii, San Jose State, and Nevada, but those are good offenses, and they can run the ball a little bit too. And so I think 3.1 yards per carry is actually pretty good. Now, clearly, that is much different than an option team they're going to be facing. So just another reason why this matchup's hard to call. As far as running backs, Bobby Cole is the top guy for New Mexico. Surprisingly, we thought Bryson Carroll, he was the leading rusher last year. Coming back, he's seeing a few catches out of the backfield, so at 4.4, he's a little cheap. He might see a few catches, but he's not the top back, and they're not supposed to win this game. Maybe they will, but he's not supposed to. Their star recruit, Nathaniel Jones, Shout out Nathaniel Jones. 3.4K. He's been coming on a little bit. The workload's not fantastic, but 3.4, I guess you could do worse as a punt. Bobby Cole, not sure I'll get there with the other good running backs on the slate, but I think he's fine. Nothing super exciting to say about him. As far as the wide receivers, I think Jordan Kress is the top guy. I definitely think he would have been the top guy, but he had a pretty crazy offseason. I know he had some medical scares, but he's still averaging the most fantasy points per game, even though I'm not sure how much preparation he got in the offseason. So at 5.9, I think he's probably the guy I would most like to play. Emmanuel Logan Green has been seeing the most targets per game, so I think he has the safer floor of anyone here. I'm not sure what the upside is, but at 5,000, he's definitely been seeing the most targets of any of their wide receivers. Erickson at 3.9K is a little cheap. He has over 100 yards so far this year as well, but not a ton of upside, I would say. As far as Air Force goes, the quarterback, Daniels, does not see as much workload as I would like to see. We can see he's not having a very good fantasy season, and his carries haven't really been there. He's averaging around 10 carries per game, which I'm not sure is enough against New Mexico to get the job done. At 6.8K, I have very little ownership interest, and the running backs are where it gets really crazy. Running backs, fullbacks, whatever the heck they have back there in the option offense. Wing backs, it's like the Bubba Gump shrimp, but with backs in the offense. Anyway, so Caden Remsburg, speed guy, he was supposed to miss the last 3 weeks, or at least 3 weeks, and that was announced about 3 weeks ago. So is he back? Nobody knows. It's Air Force. Air Force is very tight-lipped. That's why I'm not going to play a ton of this game, because I don't really know who's going to be playing on Air Force. If I do play somebody, I think it's going to be Timothy Jackson. I believe he's their fullback. He's the guy I feel safest about. Maybe if Remsburg plays, I think he's probably the number one guy. But again, from what I can tell, everybody's been out with COVID. I think he's going to be back. He's led the team in carries both games. He's been healthy. So I feel good about him. The wide receivers, this guy's listed as a wide receiver. Brandon Lewis, I don't really think he was supposed to start. I think he was getting all those carries because of the COVID situation, but he has been very productive. Lewis suspension, interesting. This note just came out. I guess he was in bad standing last year. So anyway, he looks pretty talented. He's listed as a wide receiver, but he gets a fair amount of rushing work. I'll be honest, I haven't really watched Air Force this year. But he gets a fair amount of rushing work. I'm not sure if that's going to be the same when Remsburg and Timothy Jackson are back. I think if both of them are back, maybe Lewis doesn't see very much work. But if either one of those guys are out, I know they don't play the same position, but I think he might see more workload because he appears to be their most dangerous option in the offense so far, and they are playing a bad New Mexico team. And if they do pass the ball at all, they have the worst pass defense in the country, so Air Force should be able to exploit that, and Lewis would be the guy. So he's not terrible at 4.6K. I know Air Force wide receivers, they seem really awful to play. I forget the name of the guy, but they've had some decent ones, surprisingly. Don't know if Lewis would be that guy, but it appears he would be the candidate to be one. I forget who that guy was. It was just recent, a few years ago. But I actually played him a fair amount, and he was fine as a cheap punt. All right, that is all I have for the Friday slate. Like I said, I'll be pumping out that article. Look for that. Follow me on Twitter at YonkersCFB. Link will be in the description. This was brought to you by thebreakdownsports.com. We have basketball coverage for you, NFL coverage, college football coverage, horse racing picks, sports gambling, information for a lot of different stuff. So give us a look. Other than that, folks, thanks for tuning in, and good luck.